Welcome to the Contrarian Capitalist podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by Robert Bryce, author, journalist, and public speaker. Robert, how are you doing?
I'm excellent. Thank you for having me.
Really looking forward to this. We're going to deep dive into a multitude of energy related topics. At the top of the list is electrification. Because you wrote an article recently, which I'll link to in the Substack post that comes with this. You wrote an article recently about how electrification means higher energy costs for everyone. Can you just deep
Sure.
dive into that for me, please?
Sure. Well, let me give you just a quick bit of background. So this claim, it's the promoters call it beneficial electrification. Really, it's forced electrification. And it is an agenda being pushed by a lot of dark money NGOs. These are big nonprofit organizations that don't disclose their funders, don't disclose their funding, including Rewiring America. There's another one called the Building Decarbonization Coalition. I don't know whether they disclose their budgets or not, or their budget or not. Rocky Mountain Institute, Sierra Club, Natural Resource Defense Council, some of the biggest NGOs in America on the climate front are pushing this agenda to prevent the use of natural gas in homes and businesses and force them, or prevent rather, new natural gas hookups in commercial buildings and homes. And this is an effort that started about 5 years ago in Berkeley, California, where the Berkeley City Council passed a measure banning new natural gas hookups. That was later declared illegal by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in the United States. There's litigation now pending in the U.S., but that's just the background on what this is about. And this has been promoted, this agenda is being promoted by the Biden administration and the Department of Energy to prohibit the direct use of natural gas, particularly now in commercial buildings. So that's the backdrop. And so why is it bad for consumers? Well, as I pointed out, on a BTU basis, natural gas costs less than a third the amount of electricity. And in some locations, that discrepancy is higher. But nevertheless, the reality is that electricity is a premium source of energy, and we use it a lot. But for heating your clothes dryer, your water heater, your home heating, it's much more efficient to burn natural gas directly and much cheaper. And so the Department of Energy's own numbers have shown this, both in their in numbers that they are required to publish in the Federal Register, and also just recently in their winter fuels outlook. So I'm very concerned about this agenda because it's fundamentally anti-consumer, and as I say, it's a regressive energy tax that's posing as climate policy.
And do you feel that, again, I'm just going to put my UK head on here because I got a feeling that when we're getting told about, electrifying this, electrifying that, and this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, what I
Right.
find amazing in a bad way is that people don't seem to be putting two and two together and realizing that certainly in this country, the electric unit costs are just increasing and increasing and increasing. I don't think they're going to come down anytime soon. Is that the same over in the United States?
Well, look, you will win a prize, you Brits, for screwing yourselves on the energy front. You deserve a blue ribbon because you're doing just a marvelous job. You and the Germans are competing for the prize of worst energy policy in all of Europe. Um, but our rates, thankfully, are not increasing as fast as what you're seeing in Britain. But remember, in Britain, you've had your natural gas production from the North Sea peaked in the early 90s or early aughts, and now it's been declining. So you're more and more reliant on imported natural gas. That is a strategic vulnerability and also a market vulnerability. Further, natural gas in Europe now costs 5 times more than what it costs in the United States. So you're not only closing your coal plants, you're blowing them up for some reason. I can't quite understand that necessarily, but you're becoming more and more dependent on natural gas, and you're paying 5 times more on a BTU basis for your fuel than we are here in the US. So that means lower cost energy and just as important, lower cost electricity. Now, I'll finish by just saying electricity prices in the U.S. are rising. You're seeing utilities across the country asking for major rate increases, but we're not going to catch you Brits anytime soon.
No, thankfully not. It's luckily I've only got a couple of months left of this. I'm moving country. I'm out of it. I've had enough. But that's a
Oh,
different
really?
story.
Where are you going?
So my wife is Mexican, so I'm actually moving to Mexico in January.
Aha. And where in Mexico? I'm curious.
So just outside of Toluca, so between Toluca and Mexico City, pretty much right in the middle.
Uh-huh. How's your
So
Spanish?
muy bien.
Ah, bueno, bueno.
Anyway, Mexico.
My main sentence in Spanish, mi español es pésimo. So pessimo means terrible. So that if I start every conversation with that, and then whoever I'm talking to, I was in Chile last week, they say, "Oh no, it's actually pretty good," and they say, "No, it's terrible." But then you go on and
It's when they ask you the second question and you have no idea what they've said, and it's like,
yeah, uno más
damn it.
tiempo, por favor.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Hopefully, no one catches up with us anytime soon. And we've had a lot of crazy things going on. And okay, so let's let's want to sidestep to politics then before we go back to say hydrogen and nuclear. I mean,
Sure.
there are people again, I think, that are putting two and two together, going, oh, well, are the governments that stupid, or are they being incredibly misguided with regards to energy policy? I'm sort of still on the fence, but I don't know if you've got any views on that at all, Robert.
That's such a good question. And is it pernicious or is it stupidity? I don't know. I go back and forth, to be honest with you. I think part of it is that we're ruled by policymakers that are, by and large, they're lawyers. And why are they lawyers? Because they couldn't do the math to get into engineering school. So, um, so we're stuck with a lot of policymakers who don't know anything about numbers. They don't know anything about physics. They know what polls well, right? They know what generally a narrow fraction of the voting public really likes, right? And people say, "Oh, I love the idea of solar. I love the idea of wind." Um, so is it stupidity or is it money? I think part of it clearly here in the United States is about money and campaign contributions. If you look at the big NGOs, the climate NGOs, I mentioned some of them earlier, or League of Conservation Voters, or some of these other groups that have come up that are out, that have operate on budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars per year. They are effectively just an arm of the Democratic Party. So I think in the UK, you're going to have somewhat similar dynamic when it comes to labor, and where labor raises its money. It's going to be from some of these climate NGOs, but also from some of the big companies that are promoting wind and solar. So um, it's not just about ideology and whether and intelligence. So follow the money. Who's making money off this deal?
A lot of, well, certainly over here, a lot of people operating wind farms, a lot of energy companies, a lot of people operating solar farms, and we still have an inability to want to, I think, produce nuclear or even want to produce nuclear, because every time something gets in the way, or not in my backyard, or NIMBYism, as we call it, and it's frightening, because again, I don't think enough people, generic people, are connecting the dots. That concerns me, and this is the importance of doing podcasts like this.
Well, and to speak to what's happening there in the UK, and I follow this pretty closely because I maintain the renewable rejection database. So I follow here in the US, and I follow around the world local communities that are fighting back against wind, solar, high voltage transmission. And you see that in spades all across the United Kingdom, whether it's in Ireland, whether it's in Scotland, whether it's in Britain itself. You see massive battles, pitched battles, particularly more recently over solar. Now wind was one of the big issues a few years ago. Wind energy deployments are falling because it's so unpopular, and now a lot of push on solar. But you're seeing all across the UK, and I've written about this repeatedly on my Substack, robertbryce.substack.com, about these battles. And the UK is a perfect example. And by the way, I'll make one. NIMBYism. I don't like this idea of not in my backyard, or NIMBYism, or those people that everyone everywhere cares about what happens in their neighborhood. And well, they should. And so, of course, people are going to look at these massive projects and say, well, this doesn't benefit me. It benefits the big banks. It benefits big business, benefits the big law firms, but it doesn't benefit our village, our township, our county. And so they're rejecting them. And my latest count on the renewable rejection database, I think we're here in the US, from Maine to Hawaii since 2015, over 735 rejections or restrictions of wind and solar.
Wow, a fair point well made on the NIMBYism. So thank you for making that. Quickly going back to electricity, then, and again, I'll link to your Substack in
Sure.
in the articles. I'll link to the various articles in the post. You also wrote about an inflation hurricane is shorting the electric grid. And again, just for people that are still putting the dots together with what's going on with inflation and everything like that, that actually prices for things like the equipment that are needed to maintain the grid are going up and up and up. And there's really, that's going to be the growing trend, isn't it? Or the continuing trend, I should say.
Sure. Well, yes, inflation is a big issue across the economy here in the US, across the economies in Europe. Um, I'll preface before I talk about the supply chains, let me just make a brief mention about labor, skilled labor. And this is something I travel a lot. I will do over 40 speaking engagements this year and travel a lot in rural America, talking with engineering, procurement, construction firms. The best analysis that I heard was from one of these companies, and I've talked to several of them, and they're big ones here in the U.S. You know, Kiewit, Black and Veatch, Burns McDonald, others. And the punchline was, if we had the people, we don't have the parts, and if we had the parts, we don't have the people. So across the economy and in all parts of the country, I'm hearing we don't have enough welders, we don't have enough linemen, we don't have enough pipe fitters, enough electricians, the skilled trades that are needed to expand the grid. But to go to your question about the supply chain, high power transformers, F class gas turbines. Those are the large turbines that generally over 100 megawatts or so. The wait times for those large gas turbines now is 4 to 5 years. The wait time for high power transformers is 4 to 5 years. And as one supplier told me, the higher the voltage, the longer the wait times. Add in additional wait times for things like switchgear. So all of the kit that you need to build, say, a substation for a data center or a substation for a new battery plant, or any number of these these industrial facilities, semiconductor manufacturing. All of these things require massive amounts of power. Well, you don't get the power unless you have the kit that you need, the line, the substation, the transformers, the breakers, the switchgear to make it all happen. And what we're seeing is the war in Ukraine, the hurricanes here in the U.S., Helene and Milton, the Saudis just cleaned out Siemens and GE of all of their gas turbines for the next several years. So it's a global marketplace for these commodities, and they're very specific commodities, but the supply chains are not going to be able to just say, oh, we'll just ramp up and produce a whole lot more. It doesn't work that way.
And are there supply chain bottlenecks because of, I appreciate we had global issues in 2020, 2021, etc. Have they been caused as a part of that, or are there other forces at play that we need to know about that are causing these bottlenecks in the supply side?
Well, as one of the manufacturers told me, he said, when you build a gas turbine, this is a very complex, manufacturing process, and we only have a certain number of slots that we can fill, right? So, they're not going to go out and build a new factory, just to expand their capacity right now, because they don't know what's going to happen in the next 3, 4, 5 years. If you see that sustained demand, they could do that. So it's the manufacturing capacity of the factory floor itself. But on the transformer side, I've talked with manufacturers here in the United States, including ERMCO. They make the pole-mounted and pad-mounted transformers, the 230 kV and below transformers, and they're saying we don't have enough labor, we don't have enough people to work in the factory, we can't keep them. So it's not just the parts, and there's specialty steel involved in some of the transformers, but it's also the capacity of the factory and the capacity of the workforce. So all of these things together limit the scale or the ability of what is an extraordinarily large network to grow in any kind of rapid manner.
Almost like it's creating almost like a perfect storm. That's the impression I'm getting.
Yeah, well, I that's a relatively apt description. I don't think of it so much as a storm. I just think of it as the realities of the physical world, right? That you can't. It's like the law of large numbers. Once you get to a certain size, you're not going to be able to. Once Walmart's not, to cite one, it's not just going to double its sales in 2 years, right? It's too big, right? Because you can't grow a business that big that quickly anymore. You can grow it at 5%, maybe 3%, but that's what I think we're going to see now around the world. because of these constraints, these ideas, oh, we're going to need to double the size of the grid. Well, okay, yeah, you can say that. It's easy to say, very hard to do.
Moving on to hydrogen, and as I said, we've seen a lot of euphoria with wind and solar in the last X amount of years.
Yeah.
You wrote that 9 hydrogen projects in Europe and the US have gone up in smoke since August. Now, I'm not going to claim to know a lot about hydrogen, but can you dive into if it's a fad, why those projects have failed, and give a bit of green light on it?
Sure. Well, I'll add one that just occurred just in the last day or so, and that's Repsol, the Spanish company, just announced that it's closing or uh, what is it? Pulling spending on green hydrogen in Spain. So they're now more than 9. That's 10, at least 10. But what's the reality here? And I wrote about this on my Substack. When it comes to hydrogen, the H stands for hype. We've heard about this forever. I can point you to a congressional hearing here in the United States in 1975, where a congressman was saying, oh, well, pretty soon hydrogen, we're going to use it like we use electricity. And here we are now, almost 50 years later. And where is that hydrogen fuel cell? Mr. Smallbone, I'm an old guy now. I'm 64. I've seen exactly 3 fuel cells in my entire lifetime. I mean, this idea that we're going to go to hydrogen. Okay, well, I've heard the hype. I've heard it over and over. I've heard it for decades, and yet it still hasn't happened. And why is that? Well, and why are these companies, some of the biggest industrial companies in Europe, in fact, Shell, Equinor, now Repsol, others saying, oh, well, we're not so, ThyssenKrupp, oh, not so fast on this hydrogen thing. And what are they realizing? Well, it's a net energy loser and a massive one. It's 1.5 units of energy in to get 1 unit of hydrogen out. And then you have a very small molecule, the smallest molecule we know of. Well, maybe not. I'm not going to claim that. Very small molecule, very difficult to tank, very difficult to store, very difficult to move. You can't use existing pipelines. And you have to have special seals, special valves, everything special because this molecule is so small and it causes hydrogen embrittlement, which is it weakens the metal that is used in the tankage. So, this hype has started to melt away in the face of these thermodynamic realities and the economic costs. I mean, it's just insanely expensive to produce and just as insanely expensive to try to put to use.
And do you think that people have gone down that road, people as governments, companies have gone down that route because well, especially from a company point of view, they might go down that route because they might be thinking, well, if we promote X, Y, and Z, we might be able to get subsidies from the government. Do you reckon that's part of the play here from a company point of view?
Well, that's a really good point, but I also am just been, frankly, well, I'll use a Britishism here, gobsmacked by the herd mentality, the absolute herd mentality of these massive corporations when it comes to electric vehicles and to hydrogen. That, these corporate bosses who presumably are pretty, sophisticated wouldn't do their own market research. Like Daimler, like, you name it in Europe, among the European car, Porsche, now suddenly dialing back their EV plans because, oh, customers don't want them. Well, didn't you do any market research? I mean, truly, I mean, how stupid are you that you would waste these tens of billions of dollars thinking the market was going to suddenly appear, and yet your own customers, which you would think you understand, are telling that are staying away in droves. I just saw the latest numbers from Germany. What was it? EV sales in Germany are down now to less than 4% of the total market share. And let me read you the thing, but so I think there's a herd mentality on the hydrogen issue. It's clearly the case on the EVs that these corporate bosses, oh, we want to act like we're green, decarbonization, blah, blah, climate, blah, blah, blah. But here's the headline on the piece about Repsol. This is from yesterday. Repsol has decided to put on hold 3 of its major projects in Spain, representing a total capacity of 350 megawatts due to unfavorable regulatory framework that might impose a permanent windfall tax on energy companies. The hydrogen projects put on hold include these 3 ones, blah, 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 blah. So, here was the economic realities hitting these corporate executives in the face. And they're saying, oh, maybe we won't do this now because this is insanely expensive and just bad idea.
Yeah, I think it's as you say, it beggars belief on that. I'm gobsmacked. I'll use the same Britishism. That again, as you say, these people aren't doing their research in the first place with their own customers. I mean, to me, that just, and I look at grid infrastructure as well, especially again with my UK lens, long that's what I know the most about. I look at that and go, well, we've got a lot of issues with our grid at the moment. So if you want to try to add all this wind, all this solar, all these people that are magically getting all these electric vehicles, and well, they've got to be charged somewhere. I mean, that's just, to me, that just creates a grid overload. And if the infrastructure is not there, that's no bueno as far as I'm concerned.
Well, exactly. And well, it's loony round the bend, if I can use yet another Britishism here. What we're seeing here in the US, particularly when it comes to electric vehicles, and which I'll make one quick comment about this idea about motor fuel and the idea that we're going to substitute electricity for gasoline and diesel fuel. It ignores that claim, that idea, that concept ignores the massive amount of energy that we consume in the automotive sector. It's just stunningly large. So to replace even a portion of that would require a massive expansion of the grid, which we talked about earlier, is something that's very difficult to achieve in anything like the near term. So not only do you have to build all the new generation, you have to build all the new transmission, you have to have high power transformers, breakers, kit, all that is other kit to make that happen. And what we talked about inflation, but I didn't mention the cost increases. My friend Matt Brandrup, who works at the Rural Electric Supply Cooperative, he's based in Wisconsin. They provide utility kit to cooperatives across the country. Their numbers show that in the last 4 years or so, their overall costs have gone up 50%. 50%. And that's for a whole basket of items, right? From nuts and bolts to transformers to line to gloves and, transformers, et cetera. Transformer costs have gone up 70%, according to the St. Louis Federal Reserve. You have the frame turbines that I mentioned earlier, the big, 100 megawatt class and above. They're up 70 to 75% in the last 3 to 4 years. So all of these things together, not only is the system going to expand slowly, but the cost of expanding it is going up dramatically. And those things, I just don't see a scenario in which that changes, because you're not going to be able to ramp up the amount of supply in anything like the near term. And you also have a labor shortage, so a skilled labor shortage. So all of these things together, to use your point, I would say are a perfect storm, or a very clear set of circumstances that preclude these expansions that everyone's talking about so glibly.
Yeah, and that doesn't even begin to dig into, pardon the pun, all the mining that's needed, etc., in order to get some of these really rare elements out of the ground for things like batteries, for example.
Sure.
Um,
And if I can just touch on that, because this is something I'm also very I'm interested in it as a reporter, but I'm also interested as just kind of an intellectual challenge. And I was in Chile just last week, talking to some mining companies about copper supply, and there are a lot of projections. Oh, we need to double global copper production and do so by 2050 to meet this net zero, mirage and the rest of it, decarbonization. Well, Chile has done over the past 20 years, they produce 22% of the world's copper. They've done all they can, and all they're doing is keeping their copper output flat. So again, the system is very large, and the system has the complexities of itself. And the idea that you're going to make a massive change to that system in anything like, a short amount of time, that idea is colliding head on with the realities of the physical world.
with regards to solutions, and I appreciate there's not a one solution fits all, but a lot of people, and not just yourself, I assume, will think or talk nuclear because there are many advantages to do with nuclear. So let's move on to nuclear. Obviously, we've
Sure.
seen. I think it was Microsoft, or was it Google, that with the 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania? It's one of those two companies. They've
Yeah.
signed a big deal. People are talking about an AI play in nuclear. When I was speaking to Doomberg a while ago, the consensus there was, well, nuclear is really something that's on the table that can be done, and that could help. So I don't know. Again, just go into that a bit more if you can, please,
Sure.
Robert.
Sure. Of course. Well, there has been more good news and positive traction on nuclear power in the United States in the last, I'd say, 6 months, 7 months, than I can remember in the last 3 or 4 decades. I mean, and I've watched this sector for a long time. And I've been saying the same thing now for more than 15 years. If we're serious about decarbonization, natural gas and nuclear are the way to go, end to end, natural gas to nuclear. But let's just back up. Yes, last I think it was in March where Amazon announced it was going to be an off-taker off the Susquehanna nuclear plant in Pennsylvania. They're buying that capacity from Talon Energy because they need that power. Now they're starting, I think, with 150 megawatts, could go up to 900 or nearly 1,000 megawatts to power their data centers for AI. Then you have Microsoft announced just in the last few weeks a deal to reopen the mothballed reactor at 3 Mile Island. That they would be the key off taker at a cost something like $1 billion, over $1 billion. Oracle has said it wants to use SMRs. Google has done a deal with, I think it was X Energy or Kairos to build small modular reactors. So an enormous amount of positive headlines, positive announcements that have occurred in the last few weeks and really going back to last March that I think are very positive for the long term. But the challenge, and I'll go back to what we've been discussing, is the supply chain in the near term. So a lot of these different reactor companies, the SMR companies, and by my count, there are now 39 of them, 39 companies vying to get into the SMR space. Oklo, NuScale, TerraPower, Terrestrial Energy, the list is long. And those are just the American companies. They're a long list. And you have, of course, Rolls-Royce in Britain, and then a bunch of other European companies. Is where are they going to get the fuel? Where are they going? Who's going to build the reactor vessels? Where? But I think the very clear near term issue is what about the fuel, and in particular high assay low enriched uranium, HALEU. Where will they get that? Or if they're using TRISO, which is a special type of fuel pellet or fuel what do you call it? Fuel design. Those things are hard to make. So all of these things have challenges. And again, as we talked about with high power transformers, et cetera, none of these things happen quickly.
No, it's almost like it's a sector that's been neglected. And I wasn't around in the 70s, but I was speaking to Lobo Tigre the other day, and it was a case of there are a lot of reports out there that it could have been oil money back in the 70s and 80s that really stopped the nuclear sector. I wasn't around for that, but that's what I've read, that's what I've heard. Uh, and then all of a sudden, randomly, we're back to, well, we need nuclear, and as you say, because it's been quite neglected in the past, then all of a sudden, well, we need to sort it out. But I think, again, I don't know if it's politicians just being dense, but as you've highlighted multiple times already, it's when you're then trying to deal with supply chains or getting new mines online, it's not just click your finger, switch on the light, it's done. These things can take a long time to get online.
Well, and I'll just follow on that mining point because that's key. Just a few months ago, and it's a point I made when I spoke in Chile when I was down there 2 weeks ago. I spoke 2 weeks ago as they stayed another week, but these new mines that have come online in the last 3 to 4 years have taken on average about 18 years from discovery to actual production. So we're facing these pinch points in all of these supply chains for commodities, et cetera, particularly when it comes to copper, which is one of the critical, what do they call it, transition metals, where you have declining ore quality at the existing mines, and bringing new mines on stream is now taking, as I said, an average of 18 years. Well, that's, I don't know how many dog years that is, but it's a lot. And so, again, none of this happens quickly. And none of it's going to happen cheaply. And the same applies to nuclear. And I'm very bullish on nuclear, but I think that, in fact, just earlier this month, the European Commission selected, I think, 7 different SMR projects with the aim of getting one of them online by 2032. Well, that's 8 years from now. So that's one, right? Or 2 or 3. So we have to be very sober about the scale of the challenge and also the timeline.
Is it fair to say that even with new projects coming online, no matter what country you're in, it's a case of number one, getting projects online, but number two, making sure that the grid and the subsequent infrastructure is being developed, so it's all working hand in hand. Is that a fair thing to
No,
say?
I think that's a really good point. And I used to do a podcast. I've suspended it, but I remember I talked to Bill Magwood, who's with he's part of the group that's part of the OECD. He's an American guy. And I said, well, what has to come first on the nuclear side? We were talking about, is it going to be the capital? Is it the regulatory part? Is it the supply chain? What is the most important? He said, no, we need them all at one time. We need to make them all happen at the same time. We have to have the financing. We have to streamline the regulatory part. We have to speed up the supply chains, and we have to have the labor. So all of these things have to happen together. And that is the same with the grid. It's the same with new nuclear. All of these things that you have to have. Simultaneity? Is that a word? It's a lot of syllables, but I think it's a word. They got to happen all at the same time.
I'm making up words as we go along. I think it's fantastic. It sounds good. I'll definitely keep it in there.
I like, does sound good. By the way, I found another hydrogen project was just canceled. This one was in Finland. This is from October 24th. Neste, a prominent player in oil refining, has said that it is canceling its hydrogen project at the Porvoo refinery because is facing tight economic landscapes that necessitates careful evaluation of new projects. Yeah. Okay. There you go.
More being couched as we talk. Robert, last question is more of a hypothetical one before we wrap up. Really, the question is this: is if you were in charge of either the DOE over there in the USA or World Energy, what would you do? What would your solutions be in order to get everything moving forward, so we're either meeting all these climate objectives or whatever it is that needs to be done energy wise? You're in charge. What do you do?
Well, first, if someone put me in charge, I'd fire me because it's a very bad decision. That's malpractice right there. What would be my first official act? I'm fired. I'd fire me. Well, let me give you two different answers because I think that there is when I've lectured on this, and I'm hoping to do some more lecturing. I've written about it on my Substack as well. Climatism or energy humanism. We have to pick, and we are dominated in the U.S. and you're dominated. Much of our politics rather is dominated by climatism, climate catastrophism, and this idea, we have to use less and we have to restrict the use of hydrocarbons. Well, that to me is a fundamentally anti-human outlook. And here's a fact, and it is a fact. It's not World Health Organization. More people die every year. About 3.2 million people die every year from indoor air pollution, from low quality cooking fuels. Then particularly it's almost all women and girls that are dying of of this indoor air pollution. More people are dying every year than die from indoor air pollution and low quality cooking fuels than die every year from AIDS, HIV, cholera, tuberculosis, and malaria combined. That's a scandal. I mean, it's truly a scandal. Imagine what we could do if we gave them propane or butane or LPG. That problem could be fixed like that. You would save the lives of 3 million people. You could do it theoretically. You could do it tomorrow. Well, so if I had that global, and thank you for conferring on me, this global energy czar, I would set up these, the LPG distribution networks to assure that no one on the planet has to burn cow dung or rice or wheat straw to cook their dinner. And I've seen this myself only in passing. 8 years ago, we were in India and we were on the road to Agra and we were in a car and we passed a woman on the side of the road leading a cow, and on her basket was a basket full of cow shit. And I thought I could never in my lifetime imagine my own mother, who was very dear, but a kind of prim and proper woman, of carrying a basket of cow shit on her head. And yet this was her lot in rural India. And as we passed the village, there was cow dung on the top of nearly every house, drying to be used for fuel. Well, imagine if those people had propane. Imagine if they had butane. Imagine if they had a natural gas connection. How empowering that would be for all of those people, but particularly for the women and girls. So that would be my first thing, because to me, that is a travesty that this is happening and a public health crisis that is being ignored by the wealthy countries in the West. But second, I'll repeat what I said before. If I had that power, I would be pushing natural gas and nuclear. These are the ways forward. They're obvious. Both fuels are both sources. The technologies are well known, well established, well developed. The technologies are mature. They're relatively low cost. They're deployable at scale. The amount of natural gas we have globally is, as my father used to say, more than you can say grace over. I mean, there's more, there are massive discoveries that have occurred in Africa, offshore Tanzania, Senegal, we have more natural gas on this planet than we know what to do with. There are massive stranded gas fields on the planet, including in the Mediterranean, in fact, off of Gaza and now in Lebanon. I mean, there are massive gas deposits there. If we could tap them, imagine how much better we could do in terms of reducing emissions and bringing more people out of the dark, and with cheap, abundant, reliable electricity. So those would be the first things I'd do. And after that, I think that all those transition issues will be slow because of the scale of the systems. But yeah, how's that for just two items?
No, no, it's perfect. I'll be honest, I didn't know about the um your stat there about the 3 million or so 3.2 million, I think it was, women and children per year. I
It
mean,
it
that is,
it
yes,
it,
that's a
it is
travesty.
it's gobsmacking, isn't it? I mean, when you actually
Mm,
think about
mm.
it, about the scale of what we're talking about and how little that is understood. And I'm just pulling up that slide because I think it's I've presented on it, and it is truly an amazing reality that you have so many people living in dire energy poverty, and yet it's not considered part of the regular regular discussions.
No, I say it's the first I've heard about it, and that's the purpose of doing podcasts like this, is to share that information and get that information out there so that people, are listening to it. Uh, Robert, I just want to say a massive thank you for your time. Obviously, robertbryce.substack.com. I will put all the links in that I can. But before we part ways, any other words of wisdom, any other bits of information you think or believe the listeners need to know before we sign off?
Gee, you didn't tell me you were going to ask about wisdom. I can give you a lot of stats. Um, well, I did write about this. It was climatism or energy humanism on my Substack. I'm really proud of that piece, and it did very well. I would recommend, obviously, besides reading my Substack, if people are listening, I'd recommend you go to YouTube and look for Hans Rosling's YouTube video on the washing machine, because it encapsulates a lot of what we're talking about. And he tells this amazing story. And he says, to my grandmother, the washing machine was a miracle. And he tells this, and he does it with beautiful style. He comes on stage in this TEDx talk, and there's a washing machine on stage, and he puts the clothes in the washing machine. And he tells the story as a child when his family got a washing machine and his grandmother showed up. And once they were ready to get, had all the clothes in the washing machine, she said, I want to be the one to touch the button. I want to push the button that hits start. And he makes the point that she had spent her whole life washing clothes by hand. And this machine she saw as something that was going, change her daughter or son's lives, just that, that they would be able to do this chore, this backbreaking labor, and divert it to a machine. And it's a beautifully told story. And Rosling's just amazing. He's dead now, but I would commend that to your listeners.
I will include that in the Substack post as well. Right, Robert, again, thank you very much for your time. If you're willing, it'd be great to catch up in 2025 and see what the state of play is then, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely happy to do it. Thanks a million.